The security guard's hand moved toward his radio the instant the boy stepped through the revolving glass doors of Sterling Industries. 12 years old, maybe 13, dragging a battered suitcase that looked like it had survived 3 wars and a flood. Clothes that hung loose on his thin frame. Sneakers held together with determination and duct tape. Everything about him screamed wrong place, wrong world. But the boy didn't stop, didn't hesitate, didn't show even a flicker of doubt as he walked straight across that gleaming marble lobby like he owned it. Hold it right there. Marcus, the head of security, blocked his path with the practiced authority of someone who'd removed hundreds of unwanted visitors. This is private property, son. You need an appointment to be here. The boy looked up. His eyes, an unusual shade of green with gold flecks that seemed to catch the light, met Marcus without fear. I need to see Richard Sterling. I'm here to claim my inheritance. The word inheritance detonated across the lobby like a grenade. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Designer heels froze on Italian marble. Every executive, every assistant, every person in that cathedral of glass and steel turned to stare at the poor kid who'd just said the impossible. Marcus's expression shifted from annoyed to confused to something that might have been concern. You're what now? The boy reached into his jacket, worn canvas, probably from a thrift store, and pulled out an envelope. His hands shook slightly, the only sign that he wasn't as confident as he appeared. This letter says I'm entitled to claim what's mine from the Sterling estate. I need to see Richard Sterling now. Marcus took the envelope like it might explode. His eyes scanned the document inside, and every person watching saw the exact moment the color drained from his face. Where did you get this? My mother. The boy's voice cracked on the word. She died 3 weeks ago. I found it with her things. Along with this. He pulled out a photograph, edges worn from years of handling. That's her with someone named Jonathan Sterling. The letter says he was my father. The lobby erupted in whispers that built like a storm. Jonathan Sterling? Impossible. He died years ago. Never had any children. This is insane. A woman in pearls clutched her designer bag tighter, actually taking 3 steps back like poverty might be contagious. 2 executives in suits that cost more than a used car whispered behind their hands, their expressions mixing shock with barely concealed disgust. Marcus pressed his radio. Mr. Sterling, we have a situation in the main lobby. You need to come down here now. I'm in the middle of a board meeting, Marcus. The voice that crackled through was sharp with irritation. Sir, you really need to see this. It's about Jonathan. Silence. Then, I'll be right down. The elevator chimed 30 seconds later. The doors opened and Richard Sterling stepped out like a king surveying his kingdom, because that's exactly what he was. At 56, he'd built Sterling Industries into a billion-dollar empire through ruthless intelligence and absolute control. Silver hair perfectly styled. Suit probably costing $5,000. Shoes reflecting the chandelier overhead with mirror-perfect shine. He was power incarnate. Success made flesh. Everything the boy standing in his lobby was not. Richard's eyes swept the lobby, landing on the boy with the kind of cold assessment usually reserved for balance sheets and quarterly reports. His expression didn't just show contempt, it radiated it like heat from asphalt. Marcus, Richard's voice cut through the whispers like a blade. Why is there a homeless child in my building? The words landed like physical blows. People gasped. Someone laughed. Quickly smothered. The woman with the pearls nodded as if Richard had confirmed what they were all thinking. The boy flinched but didn't back down. I'm not homeless. And I'm not leaving until you hear me out. Richard's eyebrows rose, apparently surprised that the boy could speak in complete sentences. Excuse me. My name is Ethan Cole. The boy's voice grew stronger with each word. My mother was Sarah Cole. And according to this letter, he held up the envelope. Jonathan Sterling was my father. Which makes you my uncle. And makes me entitled to my inheritance. The name Jonathan Sterling hit Richard like a punch. His perfect composure cracked for just a second. Shock, pain, something raw flashing across his face before the mask slammed back into place. Jonathan Sterling, Richard repeated slowly, dangerously, was my brother. And he died 11 years ago in a car accident. He was 28 years old. He had no children. He had me. Ethan's voice shook but held firm. I'm 12. My mom got pregnant right before he died. She never told him. Never told anyone. His voice broke. She was afraid. Afraid of what? Richard's voice dripped poison. Of people like you. Ethan looked Richard straight in the eye. People who would call her a gold digger. Who would say she trapped him. Who would treat her exactly like you're treating me right now, like she didn't matter because she wasn't rich. The silence that followed was absolute. No one in that lobby had ever heard anyone speak to Richard Sterling like that. Certainly not a child. Certainly not a poor one. Richard's face flushed red. Marcus, give me that letter. Marcus handed it over, his hand shaking slightly. Richard read it, his expression cycling through denial, anger, and finally landing on something that looked almost like fear. This is a forgery, Richard announced to the watching crowd, his voice hard. An obvious scam. Marcus, call the police. I want this child removed and charged with fraud. No. Ethan's shout echoed off marble. It's real. My mother wasn't a criminal. She worked 3 jobs her whole life and never asked anyone for anything. She died at 39 because her body just gave out from exhaustion. And I watched her collapse in our kitchen while I called 911 and begged them to hurry. His voice shattered. Tears spilled down his face and he didn't wipe them away. Just stood there, this 12-year-old boy in his thrift store clothes, crying in front of dozens of strangers who looked at him like he was a stain on their perfect marble floor. She never wanted your money, Ethan continued through his tears. She kept that letter for 12 years and never used it. She could have claimed the inheritance at any time. Could have given us an easier life. But she didn't. You want to know why? He stepped forward and Richard actually took a step back. Because she knew you'd treat us exactly like this, like we're nothing. Like we're liars and criminals just for existing. So she worked herself to death instead. She sacrificed everything to protect me from you. Richard made a sound like he'd been punched in the stomach. Jonathan's son. Living in a weekly motel, alone. Wait. A new voice cut through the tension. An older man stepped out of the elevator Richard had exited. 60s, simple suit, glasses, carrying a worn leather briefcase. His eyes swept the scene with sharp intelligence. Richard, what's going on? Lawrence. Perfect timing. Richard's voice dripped sarcasm. This child is claiming to be Jonathan's son with some forged document. I'm having him removed. Lawrence Abbott had been the Sterling family's attorney for 30 years. He'd drafted Jonathan's will. He'd been there the day Jonathan died. And as he looked at Ethan Cole, his face went completely white. Dear God, Lawrence whispered. He has Jonathan's eyes. The lobby erupted in fresh whispers. Richard spun to face his attorney. What? Those eyes. Lawrence walked closer to Ethan, studying his face with an intensity that made the boy uncomfortable. Jonathan had unusual eyes, green with gold flecks. I've only ever seen eyes like that once in my life. On your brother. And now this boy is standing here with the exact same eyes, claiming to be his son. That proves nothing, Richard snapped. Coincidence? Genetics? It doesn't. Let me see the letter, Lawrence said quietly. Richard handed it over reluctantly. Lawrence pulled out his phone, took a photo of the document, and typed something rapidly. His phone chimed. He read whatever appeared on the screen, and his hands started shaking. Richard, Lawrence said carefully, we need to talk in private. Now. I'm not going anywhere until this is resolved, Ethan said firmly. Lawrence looked at the boy with something like respect. Young man, what's your birthday? March 7th. Lawrence did the math, his face growing more ashen. Jonathan died in June 11 years ago, which means the mother was already pregnant when he died. Richard finished, his voice hollow. Jonathan never knew he was going to be a father. Ethan wiped his tears with the back of his hand. No. He never knew. Mom found out she was pregnant 2 weeks after the accident. She said she screamed so loud the neighbors called the police. She wanted him to know. She wanted. His voice broke again. She wanted him so badly, but he was gone. Something shifted in Richard's expression. The contempt flickered, replaced by something more complex. Pain, loss, memories of a brother who died too young. Jonathan always wanted children, Richard said quietly, almost to himself. It's all he talked about. Father told him he was too young, too irresponsible. But Jonathan didn't care. He was always drawing pictures of the house he'd build, the family he'd have, the life he wanted. He stopped, looking at Ethan with new eyes. He would have loved being a father. He would have been good at it too. Lawrence added softly, Jonathan had the biggest heart of anyone I ever met. Richard closed his eyes, his jaw working. When he opened them, they were wet. You have his eyes, Richard said to Ethan. And his chin. And the way you're standing there, trying so hard to be brave when you're terrified. That's exactly how Jonathan used to stand when Father yelled at him. Ethan's breath caught. You really think I look like him? I think you're the ghost of my brother walking into my lobby and destroying everything I thought I knew, Richard said roughly. Lawrence, he said, what happens if the DNA test confirms what we're all thinking? If Ethan is Jonathan's biological son? Lawrence said carefully, he's entitled to his father's full 40% share of the company. At current valuation, that's approximately $450 million. The number echoed through the lobby like a gunshot. Ethan swayed, grabbing his suitcase for support. $450 million. His mother had died with $32 in her checking account, had died without health insurance, without savings, without anything except the hope that maybe, just maybe, her son would be okay. Where are you living now? Lawrence asked gently. A motel. Ethan's voice was small. The weekly kind. I've got enough money for 3 more nights. After that. He shrugged, trying to look brave and failing completely. Richard made a sound like he'd been punched in the stomach. Jonathan's son. Living in a weekly motel, alone. I'm not completely alone, Ethan said quickly. Mrs. Chun, she was Mom's friend. She checks on me every day. Brings me food sometimes, but she's got her own kids and she can't. He stopped, unwilling to admit how scared he was. Lawrence, Richard said, his voice strange and thick, arrange immediate accommodations, a hotel suite, and financial support for basic needs. Now. Richard, I won't have my brother's child living in a motel, Richard said fiercely, surprising everyone, including himself. I won't have it. Not while I'm breathing. We'll do the DNA test. We'll verify everything. But until then, he looked at Ethan, really looked at him, and something in his face cracked open. You're not spending another night alone and scared. Whatever this test shows, you're family. Or you might be. And that's enough. Ethan stared at the man who'd called him a homeless child 5 minutes ago. The man who'd mocked his mother's memory. The man who was now offering help with tears in his eyes. Why? Ethan whispered. You don't even believe me. I believe you have my brother's eyes, Richard said roughly. I believe your mother kept that letter for 12 years without using it. I believe you walked into my building scared out of your mind and faced me down anyway. And I believe, his voice broke. I believe my brother would never forgive me if I turned away his child. Real or not, confirmed or not, you're here. You need help. And Jonathan would want me to give it. Lawrence pulled out his phone. I'll arrange everything. The DNA test, the hotel, the financial support. The test results will take 72 hours. 3 days, Ethan said numbly. In 3 days, I'll know for sure. In 3 days, Richard corrected quietly, we'll all know for sure. And either way, your life is about to change completely. He walked to Ethan. And for a moment, they stood face to face, the billionaire CEO and the 12-year-old boy, uncle and nephew. 2 people separated by worlds but connected by blood and grief and the ghost of Jonathan Sterling. I'm sorry, Richard said, and the words sounded like they cost him everything. For what I said. For how I treated you. For assuming the worst. You deserved better than that. Your mother deserved better than that. Ethan's eyes filled with tears again. She always said you were scary. That the Sterling family would never accept us. That we weren't good enough for your world. She was protecting you from people like me, Richard said bitterly. From the kind of person I've become. And she was right to be scared, because I proved every fear she ever had in the first 5 minutes you were here. But you're helping now, Ethan said quietly. That has to count for something. It's not enough, Richard said fiercely. It will never be enough. But Ethan, I swear to you, I swear on my brother's memory, I will spend the rest of my life making sure you know you matter. That you're wanted. That this is your home. The DNA test took 15 minutes. The waiting took 3 days that felt like 3 eternities. Ethan spent those 72 hours in a hotel suite that cost more per night than his mother had earned in a month. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. A bathroom with heated floors. A bed so large he could starve to death before reaching the other side. Room service brought food with a single button press. Food he barely touched because his stomach was a knot of anxiety. He'd called Mrs. Chan that first night, his voice shaking. The test is done. Results come in 3 days. And if it's positive? Mrs. Chan had asked gently. Then I'm rich. Richer than I can imagine. And if it's negative? Silence. Because if it was negative, Ethan had nothing. No home, no family, no future. Just a 12-year-old boy with nowhere to go and 3 more nights in a luxury hotel before reality came crashing down. Mrs. Chen's voice was firm. Your mother never lied. Not once in the 15 years I knew her. If Sarah Cole said Jonathan Sterling was your father, then he was. You have faith, Ethan. You hear me? Faith. But faith was hard when you were alone in a hotel room that cost more than your dead mother's funeral, waiting for a phone call that would determine your entire future. On the second day, Lawrence visited. He brought contracts, legal documents, explanations of trusts and inheritance laws that made Ethan's head spin. If the test is positive, Lawrence explained patiently, you'll inherit Jonathan's 40% share. But you're 12. You can't control it until you're 25. We'll need to appoint a guardian to manage the estate. What kind of guardian? Ideally, family. Richard is the logical choice, but, Lawrence hesitated. Given your first meeting, I understand if you'd prefer someone else. We can appoint a professional trustee instead. Ethan thought about Richard, about the contempt in his eyes when he'd called Ethan a homeless child, about the tears when he'd realized Ethan might be Jonathan's son, about the fierce protectiveness when he'd insisted on arranging the hotel. What would my father want? Ethan asked quietly. Lawrence's expression softened. Jonathan loved his brother. They fought constantly. Richard thought Jonathan was irresponsible. Jonathan thought Richard was too rigid. But underneath it all, they loved each other deeply. If Jonathan were here, he'd want Richard to take care of his son. Then Richard, Ethan decided. If the test is positive. On the 3rd morning, Ethan woke to his phone buzzing. A text from Richard, results are in. Coming to the hotel. We'll go to Lawrence's office together. Ethan's hands shook so badly he could barely type back, okay. Richard arrived 30 minutes later, looking like he hadn't slept in days. His perfect hair was disheveled. His suit was wrinkled. His eyes were red-rimmed. Ready? Richard asked. No, Ethan admitted. But let's go anyway. The car ride to Lawrence's office was suffocating silence. Ethan stared out the window, watching the city blur past, and tried not to throw up. Lawrence's office was on the 20th floor of a building that screamed old money and older secrets. Wood paneling, leather chairs, windows overlooking a park where normal people walked normal dogs and lived normal lives. Lawrence sat behind his desk, a manila folder in front of him. His expression was carefully neutral. Sit, he said gently. Ethan and Richard sat. The folder lay between them like a live bomb. Before I open this, Lawrence said carefully, I want both of you to understand something. Whatever this test says, it doesn't change certain truths. Ethan lost his mother 3 weeks ago. He's alone and scared. That's real, regardless of DNA. Just open it, Richard said roughly. Lawrence opened the folder, pulled out a single sheet of paper, read it once, twice, then looked up with tears in his eyes. "The test is conclusive," Lawrence said, his voice thick. "Ethan Morgan Cole is Jonathan Sterling's biological son with 99.99% certainty. There is no doubt. None whatsoever." The world stopped. Ethan heard the words, but they didn't make sense. Couldn't make sense. Because if they made sense, then everything changed. Everything. Richard made a sound like someone had punched him in the chest. He stood abruptly, walked to the window, and pressed his forehead against the glass. His shoulders shook with silent sobs. Richard Lawrence stood concerned. "He had a son," Richard whispered, his voice breaking. "Jonathan had a son. All these years I had a nephew, and I didn't know. He grew up poor while I lived in a mansion. He watched his mother die while I threw money at problems. He was alone and I was here and I never knew." "You couldn't have known," Lawrence said gently. "I should have tried harder to find her." Richard spun around, his face wet with tears. "After Jonathan died, Sarah disappeared. I told myself she'd moved on, found someone else, wanted nothing to do with us. But the truth is, I didn't look hard enough because part of me was relieved she was gone, because she was poor and unsuitable. And I thought she'd been a distraction for my brother." "She wasn't a distraction," Ethan said quietly. "She was the love of his life. She told me that once when I asked about my father. She said he was the only man who ever made her feel like she mattered." Richard's face crumpled. "And I treated you exactly like I treated her. Like you were nothing, like you didn't matter. I proved every fear she ever had about this family." "But you changed," Ethan said. "You helped me. You got me this hotel. You arranged the test. You didn't have to do any of that." "It's not enough," Richard said fiercely. "It will never be enough. But Ethan, I swear to you, I swear on my brother's memory, I will spend the rest of my life making sure you know you matter. That you're wanted. That this is your home." Lawrence cleared his throat. "There are practical matters we need to discuss. The inheritance, the guardianship, later," Richard said firmly. "Right now, I'm taking my nephew home." Richard's estate sat 40 minutes outside the city, hidden behind iron gates and ancient oak trees that had witnessed generations of Sterling family secrets. As the car turned up the long driveway, Ethan pressed his face against the window, trying to process what he was seeing. It wasn't a house. It was a monument to wealth he couldn't comprehend. 3 stories of stone and glass. Columns that belonged in a museum. Gardens that stretched toward infinity. A fountain in the circular driveway that probably cost more than every place Ethan had ever lived combined. "This is where you live?" Ethan breathed. "This is where we live now," Richard corrected gently. "Both of us." The car stopped. A woman in her 50s appeared at the massive front door. Kind eyes, graying hair pulled back neatly, an expression of genuine warmth that seemed impossible in a place this intimidating. "That's Margaret," Richard explained. "She's run this household for 20 years. She knew Jonathan. She'll be happy to meet you." Margaret came down the steps, and Ethan saw tears in her eyes before she even reached him. "Master Ethan," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Welcome home. You look so much like him. So very much like Jonathan." "You knew my father?" "I did. He was the kindest soul I've ever met. Always had time for a conversation. Always remembered birthdays. Always made people feel like they mattered." Margaret smiled through her tears. "He would have been over the moon to meet you." She led them inside. The foyer alone was bigger than the motel room where Ethan had been staying. Marble floors reflected a chandelier that sparkled like captured starlight. A sweeping staircase curved upward toward the second floor. Rooms branched in every direction, each one glimpsed through doorways that revealed glimpses of luxury Ethan had only seen in movies. "I've prepared the blue bedroom for you," Margaret said. "It was your father's room growing up. I thought you might like to stay there." Ethan's throat closed. "My dad's room." "If you'd prefer something else." "No," Ethan said quickly. "I want to see it. Please." Margaret led him up the grand staircase, down a hallway lined with family portraits, to a door at the end. She opened it and Ethan stepped into his father's childhood. The room was large but not overwhelming. A four-poster bed sat against one wall. Windows overlooked the gardens. Bookshelves lined another wall, still filled with books Jonathan had read decades ago. And on the desk sat a photograph, a younger Richard and Jonathan, arms around each other's shoulders, laughing at something outside the frame. "I kept it exactly as he left it," Richard said quietly from the doorway. "I couldn't bring myself to change anything. After he died, I used to come in here and just sit, trying to feel close to him." Ethan walked to the bookshelves, running his fingers over the spines. Adventure novels, science fiction, poetry. His father had loved to read, just like Ethan did. He underlined his favorite passages, Richard said, pulling out a worn copy of a fantasy novel. He opened it to a random page, and Ethan saw pencil marks highlighting a quote, "Family isn't who you're born to, it's who you die for." He believed that, Richard continued, drove our father crazy. Jonathan thought family was about love and choice, not blood and obligation. He was always defending people father thought were beneath us. Always fighting for the underdog. "Like my mom," Ethan said quietly. "Exactly like your mom." Richard's jaw tightened. Father forbade Jonathan from seeing her. Said she was inappropriate, unsuitable, that she'd ruin his future. Jonathan told father that Sarah was his future, and if father couldn't accept that, then maybe they didn't have a future as father and son. "What did you do?" Ethan asked. Richard's laugh was bitter. "I sided with father. Told Jonathan he was being immature and reckless. That Sarah was using him. That he'd regret choosing some poor girl over his family legacy." He looked at Ethan with red-rimmed eyes. "I was so certain I was right. So absolutely convinced that I knew what was best for my little brother. And then he died. And then he died 2 weeks after our fight. We never reconciled. The last words I said to him were, 'You're destroying your life over a woman who isn't worth it.'" Richard's voice broke. He died thinking I hated him. Died thinking his family had rejected him. And now I find out that woman I insulted was pregnant with his child, working herself to death to raise his son, and I never knew because I never cared enough to look. Ethan sat beside his uncle on the bed. "Mom never said anything bad about your family. I asked once, I was maybe 7, why I didn't have grandparents or uncles like other kids. She just said my dad's family was complicated and that it was better for us to be on our own." "She was protecting you," Richard said. "From people like me. From the judgment and contempt she knew you'd face." He turned to face Ethan fully. "But I'm not that person anymore. Or I'm trying not to be. You're going to live here, in your father's room, and I'm going to make sure you know every day that you're wanted. That you belong. That this is your home." "What about school?" Ethan asked, practical concerns flooding back. "And my stuff from the motel? And Mrs. Chen? I need to tell her I'm okay." "Already handled," Richard said. "Margaret packed your things from the motel this morning. They're in the closet. As for school..." He pulled out his phone, showing Ethan a website for an elite private academy. "Whitmore Preparatory. Best school in the state. I've already spoken with the headmaster. You start next week." Ethan's stomach dropped. "That's... Richard, I can't go there. Look at me. I'm a public school kid who barely passed math. Those kids will eat me alive." "Those kids," Richard said firmly, "will treat you with respect because you're a Sterling. And if they don't, they'll answer to me." He softened. "But I understand you're scared. So here's the deal, you try it for 1 semester. If you hate it, we'll find somewhere else. But Ethan, you deserve the best education money can buy. Your father would want that for you." A knock at the door interrupted them. Margaret appeared, looking apologetic. "I'm sorry to intrude, but there's a situation downstairs. The media has somehow learned about Ethan. There are reporters at the gate." Richard's expression darkened. "How did they find out?" "Someone at the DNA lab must have talked," Margaret said. "The story broke an hour ago. Secret Sterling heir discovered. It's already trending online." Ethan felt the room spin. The media knows. Everyone knows. Richard pulled out his phone, scrolling rapidly. His face went pale. "They're calling your mother a gold digger," he said quietly. "Saying she hid you to extort money. Saying—" He stopped, clearly reading something that made him furious. "What?" Ethan demanded. "What are they saying?" "Nothing that matters," Richard said tightly. "Lawrence is already preparing a statement. We'll control this narrative." "Let me see." Ethan grabbed the phone. The headlines were brutal. Billionaire's secret love child claims fortune. Cleaning woman's son inherits millions. Sterling family scandal. Dead heir's hidden child emerges. And the comments underneath were worse. Vicious strangers calling his mother names, questioning Ethan's legitimacy, suggesting the whole thing was an elaborate scam, despite the DNA proof. "They're destroying her," Ethan whispered, tears streaming down his face. "Mom worked herself to death and they're calling her a criminal. A liar. He couldn't say the words. Couldn't repeat the horrible things strangers were writing about the woman who'd given him everything. Richard took the phone back gently. "We're going to fix this. Tomorrow. We're holding a press conference. You don't have to attend, but if you want to defend your mother's memory, I'll stand beside you." "I'll do it," Ethan said immediately. "I'll tell them the truth about her." "Are you sure? The media can be cruel. They'll ask invasive questions. They'll try to catch you in contradictions." "I don't care," Ethan said fiercely. "Mom spent 12 years protecting me from people who would judge us. She's not here to defend herself, so I'll defend her. I'll make sure the world knows Sarah Cole was a good person who loved her son and never asked for anything she didn't earn." Richard looked at him with something like awe. "You're exactly like Jonathan. He had that same fire, that same refusal to back down when something mattered." "Will you help me write what to say?" "We'll do better than that," Richard said. "We'll tell the truth. All of it. About Jonathan and Sarah. About how they loved each other. About how your mother raised you alone because she was too proud and too afraid to ask for help. About how she worked 3 jobs and died young because poverty doesn't care about dignity." He pulled Ethan close. "We're going to make sure everyone knows Sarah Cole was a hero. That she sacrificed everything for her son. That this family failed her, and by extension failed you, and we're going to spend the rest of our lives making that right." That night, Ethan lay in his father's childhood bed, staring at the ceiling and trying to process everything. 3 days ago, he'd been facing homelessness. Now he was sleeping in a mansion, heir to a fortune, about to face the media as the secret son of Jonathan Sterling. His phone buzzed. A text from Mrs. Chin. "Saw the news. Are you okay, sweetheart?" Ethan typed back, "I'm safe. Living with my uncle now. It's a lot. Your mother would be so proud of you. So very proud." Ethan stared at those words until they blurred. Would his mother be proud? Or would she be horrified that the secret she'd kept for 12 years was now splashed across headlines? Her name being dragged through the mud by people who'd never known her. He got out of bed and walked to the window. The estate grounds stretched endlessly, perfectly manicured gardens glowing in the moonlight. Somewhere out there, past the gates, reporters were camping out, hoping for a photo, a quote, anything to feed the hungry media machine. "I'm going to make this right, Mom," Ethan whispered to the glass. "I'm going to make sure they know who you really were. I promise." A soft knock made him turn. Richard stood in the doorway, also unable to sleep. "Can't rest either?" Richard asked. "Too much in my head." Richard walked to the window, standing beside Ethan. For a long moment, they both just looked at the moonlit gardens. "Your father used to stand at this exact window," Richard said quietly. "When he was upset or scared or overwhelmed, he'd come here and look at the stars. He said it helped him remember that his problems were small compared to the universe." "Did it work for him?" "Yes. He had this ability to find peace in chaos. I always envied that about him." Richard's voice grew thick. "I have so many regrets, Ethan. So many things I'd change if I could, but the biggest one is that I never told Jonathan I was proud of him. That I admired his courage to love whoever he wanted, to stand up to father, to choose his own path." "You can tell me," Ethan said quietly. I'm his son. Maybe that counts for something. Richard's eyes filled with tears. Then I'll tell you every day. I'm proud of you, Ethan. Proud of your courage walking into my building. Proud of your love for your mother. Proud of the person you're becoming despite everything you've lost. I'm scared, Ethan admitted, of tomorrow. Of the media. Of messing up and making everything worse. And we'll be scared together, Richard said. But we'll face it together too. You're not alone anymore, Ethan. Your family. And Sterlings protect each other. As they stood at the window where Jonathan Sterling once stood, uncle and nephew, Ethan felt something shift inside him. He was still scared. Still grieving. Still overwhelmed. But for the first time since his mother died, he wasn't alone. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to face whatever came next.